are our intensive care units in the UK prepared? Let's talk to Dr. Ron Daniels, who is a consultant in intensive care, University Hospitals Birmingham, and also here is Peter Gibb, co-founder and CEO of ICU Steps. That is a patient group for people who've been in intensive care. And we've got Alwyn Puthan Purakal, who is an ICU nurse and programme lead at the University of East London. Welcome all of you. Okay, I want to start with you, Dr. Ron Daniels, if I may. Intensive care particularly, are we ready?
Well, we're doing what we can. We're training staff in the use of protective equipment. We have protocols in place as to how and when to escalate care. But there's a lot about this coronavirus that we don't know, particularly the size of the burden. And if some of the estimates that we're hearing come true, then we're going to face some real challenges.
Are we ready?
We've heard about the provision of 5,000 extra intensive care beds. Now, we have to bear in mind that the UK has some of the lowest provision of intensive care beds of any country in Europe and indeed in the developed world. We have half as many intensive care beds per capita than Italy does, for example. So where are these 5,000 beds going to be provided? Well, they might be provided in operating theatres, and that's fine, but who's going to staff them? We're not going to suddenly find 10,000 more intensive care nurses, X hundred more intensive care doctors, and the equipment is going to be challenging, the supply chain is going to be challenging.
Forgive me for asking again, are we ready?
If we look at some of the less sensationalist predictions, for example, the one that 20% of the population are going to be infected at any one time, of those, around 1%, the Italian experience, are needing intensive care. That's 136,000 people across the UK needing intensive care within the next few weeks. That's 4 months' worth or 5 months' worth of intensive care cases. We cannot escalate our capacity rapidly enough to accommodate those patients.
Does that mean you're saying we're not ready?
I think we're doing what we can with the resources available to be ready, but if these predictions are accurate, then we're never going to be ready.
Does that mean then intensive care staff will have to start making decisions about who to admit to intensive care for what treatment?
So there are things we can do, and I will come on to that. There are things that we can do. We can cancel elective cases, and some hospitals are already doing that, particularly elective cases that are going to need long admissions, so freeing up available beds. That's going to mean that surgeons and anaesthetists will not be working on elective cases, so we can provide intensive care, for example, in operating theatres, and care can be delivered by those highly skilled but non-specialist staff in intensive care. In terms of whether we can do this and whether we can do this at the scale required, that's really going to depend on whether these predictions are correct or not.
Okay, let me talk to our guests in the studio. Do you think we have the capacity to cope?
I think learning from experience and also what Dr. Daniel has explained as well, there is a tremendous pressure at the moment with the NHS, but learning from the past, we can definitely cope with the situation that we are facing with. We can definitely flex up to accommodate extra patients in a high dependency unit.
How? Because Dr. Daniels talked about needing an extra 10,000 staff.
I think also it will be down to the fact that we would need to provide education for the patients out in the community to prevent the illness spreading across the wider setting of the community, and primarily down to hand washing, basic good hygiene. Hand washing is the best strategy that is available to prevent patients from coming into the IT settings as well.
Right, so if people follow the basic advice, then we shouldn't see a spike in numbers of people needing to be treated in ICU units, so we won't need the extra 10,000 staff.
Well,
I mean, that is like crossing your fingers and hoping.
Well, fundamentally, we can all do what we can to prevent this infection spreading widely.
Yes, yeah.
And principally, as the government was advising, it is all about washing your hands more often and frequently for 20 seconds.
Okay, on that point, I'm going to bring in an interview that I did with a professor of anaesthesia in Italy. He's called Professor Giacomo Grasselli, Professor of Anaesthesia and Intensive Care. He's at the University of Milan. He's also medical director of the ICUs at one of the hospitals in Milan, and he's currently coordinating the network of ICUs in Lombardy who are taking care of patients with coronavirus. And he told us that the UK has to get ready.
What happened to us is like a bomb which exploded. So they have to be ready to take care of a huge number of patients, and of a number of patients that is growing day by day, and that can certainly exceed the capacity of ICU admission of any healthcare system, no matter how efficient and modern it is. So the most important message that you need to give to the population, then we can speak about the ICU. But the most important patient is to teach, to educate the population that the only way to win this battle is to change the behavior of the people. So they have to stay at home, they have to avoid crowded place, they have to wash their hands.
What do you think, Professor, about the fact that in the UK we are not required to stay at home, that large gatherings are still going ahead? For example, there's a huge racing festival in Cheltenham which begins today, which is happening.
This disease is quite strange to me. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I'm just saying what I am observing, because we have this huge outbreak here in Lombardy. Then we have several outbreaks in the country, but they are not comparable in dimension to what we are living here. I don't know if it's because we have a higher density of population, because Milan is a big center of people coming and going everywhere. So I do not have a clear explanation. For example, the number of ICU admissions in Italy is much higher than what was reported in China, provided we can compare Italian and Chinese populations. For the other countries, I don't know. If you have a limited number of cases and you feel like that you can contain the spread of the disease, it's fine. I would be very careful in this period, very careful, because it spreads incredibly quickly. And then when it's like, it's like a fire.
Dr. Daniels, do you take heed of that warning?
I think we'd be foolish not to take heed of that warning, and I absolutely respect what my colleague says. We do have it in our hands to delay the spread of this and to mitigate against it. Hand washing, but it's not just about hand washing. It's around that bowl of crisps in the office that everybody's diving into. We need to stop practices like that. We need to stop touching our faces. These are learned habits for me for 49 years that are going to be difficult to unpick. So we can potentially impact on this. We can potentially slow it. But if we fail, then we need to heed these warnings very seriously.
Let me bring in Peter Gibb then, who's co-founder